As therapists, when we work with our clients, we're so focused with the people in front of us that sometimes it can be easy to lose sight of the larger macro system that our clients are living with day to day. And it can be easy to underestimate the power, the influence that those systems have on our clients' lives. Here today to talk about how to see this and how to work with it effectively is my very special guest, Gino Titus Luciano, who's president of the Hawaii Counselors Association. And he has a lot of experience in this type of systems management. And he's here to share his wisdom with you today. So, Gino, welcome so much. I'm happy to connect with you.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We're going to have a nice time together. But before we dive in here, maybe you could share with our community here just a little bit more about you and your background, because you're doing all kinds of things. And I know that in addition to your group practice and a foundation, that you're also working with policy advisors, legislators, and trying to affect change on a broader, more systemic level, because you've seen firsthand how it shows up in the lives of your clients, and it really needs to be addressed. And so I'm so curious personally just to hear a little bit more about your origin story and where this passion came from.
When I first went to graduate school and was looking for internships, I noticed that it was really challenging to find work in the private setting or counseling specific setting. A lot of it was integrated with social work. And I think from there that I found, the cup was absolutely half full, because it was such an eye-opening experience, not just into mental health, but into the wings of mental health that are in social work and other systems-based work. And while I really valued that, I think part of me wanted to have that opportunity, to rotate into something like a private practice. I was really fortunate that eventually that was something that was a part of my training process. But it was, something that I noticed with my colleagues, other people that I worked with, that most of us, we spent time cutting our teeth in the social work arena and not necessarily in the counseling arena. Yeah. And so that kind of got my mind started that if I were to ever be in a position to make change, what would I want that to look like? And recognizing that environment also impacted not just the counselor's trajectory, but maybe the way that they conceptualized therapy, worked with therapy, and how would they consider moving some of their skill set in to be more adaptive to what's happening here in Hawaii, to be considerate of the culture of things that I think are really important to recognize in the world of counseling. We understand that every place is nuanced. The people, the populations are specific, and we want to be mindful of that. And I think that social work is such an important and necessary thing, but finding that specific area and room for counselors to come out and train as counselors and not necessarily social workers was a really important thing for me.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious to know if there's an example of a time or a situation that you were personally involved with where you walked away thinking like, we need to do something.
Absolutely. I think that as I can recall some of the work that I've done in the social service setting in the arena, I went in specifically to work with a family oriented around maybe anger and stress management. And the clients, I think, needed an additional level of support because there was more coming into play here. And I think that there were some safety factors that were not being really considered. There was substance use, there was other things, but the social worker, I think, working in that didn't want to maybe bring all of that in. I'm not sure from their end how they were looking at it. And when I walked to that, I had went to my supervisor and said, these are some of the concerns. My recommendation is maybe continuing in this direction to provide this type of support. Mm-hmm. And my supervisor was very kind about it and very much, saying that's a really great idea. Unfortunately, this case concludes when we finish our portion of this. And so, I really felt like there was something left to be desired where this family could have used something more than just psychoeducation, because I think that was primarily a big part of what we're doing versus unpacking what was happening there. There was things that could have really, I feel like, been pulled out to help this family, not just with some of the immediate issues. And I really understand the triage mentality, especially in some of these big cases, but
Sure.
there was something there, and it's, not just fixing the symptoms of a problem, but really trying to address the core of the sickness. That is something that was really, I think it really stood out to me. It really stood out to me that for our clients, for the counselors, we're not being able to intervene in the way that maybe we would really like to. And, there's also been times, I think, where it's the opposite of that, where there are people who come into a situation systemically, for whatever reason. There was this family I worked with, and I could really see that there was a lot of change in a small capacity with this psychoeducation, with the small interventions of therapy. And we really were starting to get the ball rolling. And then all of a sudden they were dropped from services because they had met certain requirements, but they wanted to continue. And they asked, how can we still see you folks? But we told them, we couldn't. That's unfortunately, we're not a private setting, and you're here with us as long as the contract essentially is open. And once that closes, our services close. And sometimes it's hard to just say, all right, good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, because particularly in the spaces that you're describing, a lot of times it really is a psychoeducation and resourcing. And as soon as people get to a certain level of stability in the eyes of the system, they're cut loose. And you and I, as counselors, see so much more opportunity for them. And then that door closes. And you didn't say this out loud, but if I may extrapolate, like it just feels so unfair, because in a lot of ways, especially for somebody that has a desire and an interest, but also such a need, such a shame to not be able to give that to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that unfair is probably a big part of how I think that really, that resonated with me, not just because that wasn't an isolated incident. Mm-hmm. This has happened several times. And in the work that I've done as well, certain type of interventions where the primary, there was a specific set of tools, approaches that you would use. And there are times where it felt very obtuse, and I want to maybe approach you in this way. Maybe I want to bring in some CBT, but then maybe some dynamic approach to really tease us out and really get in there. But if we're expected only to march in a certain linear path, then it feels very restricting. And that, I know a lot of my colleagues who also were counselors, we felt very limited by what we could do, the change that we could affect. And it didn't feel authentic, I think, on a clinical level, where I recognize a certain intervention that really would be helpful here, but by contract, I'm not supposed to do that intervention. And we have to honor that. That was our jobs, and that's what we had to do. So, but it did feel, there were times where I felt inauthentic, if you will. So one of our big pushes, and something that went over this past legislative season, was a telehealth bill in which we expanded telehealth services, audio only. And it was something that felt like such a small nuanced thing, but really changed the way that we had provided access to services for people in remote situations, remote parts of the island. Our island chain works where we have a main hub. Oahu is where we see the majority of our population, but there are various other islands where people are not necessarily able to access service. It is a drive. Some people don't have cars. Some people don't have internet. And so the audio only really was this push to support the rural community and get them access to people who, if you look at if we were to draw a heat map of where the most counselors are, you're going to see them concentrated on the main island is what it's identified as.
Cities, I would think. Yeah, towns. Mm-hmm.
And so there are, support services on the other islands, but they're likely, either getting to them just in person. It's just, the amount of people available. We are operating, and I think nationwide, in a deficit of counselors. There's a need for people in the mental health profession. And so, we're not exempt to that. And this was something really important to us. It was a big push, and we're taking it a step further in a different way coming up in this coming season, what we're really trying to get ourselves aligned with is a counselor compact where we can have an interstate compact where that allows some, ebb and flow of clinicians to work outwards, those come inwards, and to be connected to, I think, a larger community in the counseling field, which I think is really necessary to help bridge, build, and educate from both ends.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about what other needs you see and opportunities to create legislative or regulatory change to meet those needs. I mean, clearly accessibility is a huge problem. And in Hawaii, it sounds like, also a lot of places in the United States, really. Yeah. I mean, there are places where technology isn't the same. Like, you don't have gig level internet in every community or the hardware to do video conferencing reliably. And so this small change to the way that we define what is acceptable in terms of that connection, like talking on the phone instead of having to be like a face-to-face video call, that's a game changer. What other opportunities do you see in either your community or in the larger nation? Where should we keep going?
That's a really great question. To me, the answer is in internship students. And I think that this is something that is a big near and dear thing to me. I currently am not active, but I also teach an affiliate faculty with Northwestern University. I've taught methods in the graduates program for students there and in their group supervision, the reflective group supervision. And there are so many times where I see some really brilliant minds, people who are hungry to affect change. And I think people just, especially in the beginning of their career, are ready to run and ready to hit the ground. Not every setting so for example, in the state of Hawaii, if you were to take an internship student, wonderful, but there's only a certain limit to the work they can do, which is fair because we can't have them doing everything, but they are not reimbursed for the work that they do. We couldn't submit insurance claims for them. We could bill a client, but, the client would, again, we would try to scale that out. But for a lot of places, they don't want to charge. We try to keep it pro bono when we bring in an internship student, at least for the clients, as they're coming in, working with someone really cutting their teeth. I think that, that exchange makes sense. And, but I do feel that this is an untapped or underutilized market. I know that there are some places that take advantage of that and really help students get into good training opportunities. But also, again, sometimes it's not necessarily in a counseling arena. And I do feel that if we were to somehow find ways to support the idea of practices or other places being funded to help these students come out and work directly in, a variety of settings, I think that we really could take this, underutilized area of our field and not just grow an experience, but really increase the amount of support that is out there. And, it really is going to chip away at that deficit of people in the field, I think, much sooner at a much greater capacity.
Yeah, I hear that. And I hear what you're saying, that if there was some type of economic support, a way to generate revenue from the activities of interns or students, then there would be more resources to have them in roles that were conducive to their training, like actually working with clients and having those real world experiences. And that's a barrier to being able to train them the way that you'd like to see. I am also curious on that note. I mean, I think generally speaking, there are great internship sites that are very caring and oriented around the experiences of students and trainees and interns. And then there are others that are quite exploitative. I had another guest on the show not too long ago, Dr. Amber Bourne. I was talking about some of the patterns in our industry where early career clinicians, interns, postdocs are given the dirtiest jobs and huge caseloads, high need clients, the type of work that more seasoned clinicians often don't want to do, and that it can really impact them negatively. It can be traumatizing. They feel like they don't have a lot of support. I guess I'm curious to hear how you would seek to balance that if we create financial incentives for more companies and organizations to put interns into that role.
Absolutely. And, 100%. I've seen that. I'm sure you've seen that. A lot of people in the field, I know several people who've walked away from the profession, made it all the way to the point of licensure, and just were so burnt out.
Yeah.
Either they've got their license and said, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm out. Or right there right before the stops, right before the finish line, and just said, no, I can't. It's not worth it to me. Right. And it's hard because you see so much investment and work that these people have put in, and you want them to push, but I understand. I get it. I fully do. If we look at that, and it absolutely is the case that some sites are saying, well, this is a part of the cycle. And I think that it becomes a cycle that we accept in a lot of places where we do have an overwhelming amount of work, where a place is committed. All right, we're going to see this many clients. We got this much people coming in. We're only getting we only get so much financial support to have 2 or 3 interns. Good luck. The 3 of you are going to have to chop this up and take on these huge caseloads. Now, if we, again, really look at this economically and build in a level of equitable support for students, we could bring in more students, distribute more work. Sure, there are clients who are going to inevitably work with challenging cases. But if they were also to be given the opportunity to have oversight from a seasoned clinician who can help them walk through that, I think it really helps to balance that out, is in addition to the amount of people there, the supervision and oversight. And I think that a big part of a lot of people talk about the need for, additional supports in mental health, but I think that a lot of people aren't really talking about what it would look like to fund that, because at the end of the day, a lot of places, it is about the funding. We look at a lot of places in nonprofit agencies. We are aware that they are limited, and, that they have, probably themselves stretched thin. But if they could get more money, more support, then yes, that organization could support a little bit more. But we also look at sustainability. How long can they do that? Are they on a grant? Is this something that they're generating income with? And so when we look at those coming into the private arena, where I think there's opportunity to have longevity when it comes to funding, structuring some of this economic change, it really could provide long-term stability to people coming in as a training ground. And I think that it would just open up, not take away from anywhere, but just add benefit and strength into the field.
Yeah, I could see that. And make it easier to have that many more supervisors and training experiences and resources for students if there was funding around it. I get that. Yeah. What about other activism that you've been pursuing to benefit clients more directly, and maybe in Hawaii, but even the greater U.S. and I guess related to this, I mean, we are in a space on the timeline right now where funding is also being taken away from all kinds of things or threatened. And I guess I'd be curious to hear your thoughts around where you see opportunities for therapists who wanted to be more active in creating change on a systemic level. What do you see as being the low-hanging fruit or the most productive area in which to push for systemic change?
So wonderful question. And let me maybe answer in a few ways and a few things that I heard there. Advocacy wise, I think that the education of counselors is evolving, and the base that most of us learned our training is rooted in historical context, which is great. We want to rely on the academic aspect to inform us, to educate us, to guide us on what does work. But as times are evolving, as we start to expand, our experiments, the data, to understand cultural cultural considerations. I think that's a big thing that a lot of clinicians are, making sure they get in front of in school. Most schools are bringing this in the education systems about understanding cultural nuances, about regions, places, histories, factoring that all in. I think that's really important. I think that's something that we do see. And that is something that clinicians, at least in a place like Hawaii with such a unique history and population makeup, the demographic here looks very different from the continental U.S. And even in regions of the continental U.S., and I'm sure in a lot of places it's not as, homogenous of demographics, where there is a lot of interplay, a lot of interconnection between different cultural groups. We see that there could be a need for specific type of understanding and considerations when it not just comes to the way that we address them, but the treatment interventions themselves specifically. I think that we recognize and have some understanding that there is things that we should consider and maybe adjust differently, but really looking at long-term trajectory again. And this really goes to the ecology and patterns in which our clients walk into in their communities, whether they're in their, micro, meso, macro communities in which they interact with consistently, understanding what it is that we're trying to change, what change looks like, and whether that is something that is consistent and congruent with the way that their attitudes, beliefs, and cultures, resonate. So I just wanted to plug that in as a part of something that I do think is really important for counselors. But in regards to other types of social change, what I really will say is getting connected to an organization. Now, that really could be there's so many different types of organizations out there, but whether it is your local chapter or your state chapter with, American Counseling Association, Psychological Association, the MFTs, LCSWs, everybody has an opportunity to bridge. And I think that as professionals collectively coming together and understanding and taking the time to not just get educated by the CEUs, but understanding what is coming down through change. And I think that education really is a great place for counselors to look at what is happening in their profession, in their world, because I've talked with various counselors over time. And, again, I'm going to qualify this just, understanding this isn't everybody and maybe just in some of the people that I've connected to, but they're not necessarily aware of how their work could be affected, how it has been impacted by policy happening in the ledge, just, at a state level, at a federal level. I think it's important to help people learn. And I think that if we get a chance to start people really coming to these groups, there's more opportunity to learn and to participate in change, whether that advocacy looks like participating in things like, not just protests, but, community support opportunities, cultural events, community events. There are so many times in which we can show up as that representation and bring awareness and education to ourselves. Yeah.
That's really great advice. And I think I'm glad we're talking about this because, I don't know what it was like for you, but in my experience going through grad school and being kind of early career, there's a lot of talk about different organizations and, the APA, ACA, all the things, and opportunities to get involved. And that can be part of the student experience, early career experience. It was certainly encouraged in my training program. But then, you become licensed, you get out there, you start working like 5 years out, 10 years out, you have kids, life, all the things. I'm not going to this Colorado Psychological Association like meetings on a regular basis anymore, right? And what you're saying is that actually you really should stay involved. And I had an interesting experience just this past year. I had kind of, drifted away from being quite as active in the associations and got back in the game and started going to some conferences. I went to APA, some other conferences that I've been involved in. And every time have been like, oh my gosh, look at all these people and, at research, doing things and advocacy groups and special interest groups. And so, I think that that's a very important takeaway and a good reminder that there are these professional organizations. And so even if you're solo private practitioner, like just driving back and forth to your office every day, like there's a lot out there and it's pretty easy to get involved with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that, and again, I really circle, I think, so much of my points back to community and the ecology. A lot of us, when we get into that rhythm, especially just, as you were saying, it just resonates.
Yeah.
After a couple of years, you get the hang of it, you know what you're doing, and the rest of life shows up. There's so much of life that is busy through grad school, through, going through your internships after, getting your hours, finally getting licensed. Once you get started, you want to live life. And I think that makes sense. And it is really important. But staying connected really, I think, helps people stay connected to the passion. The community is important. It is really, I think, this need for us to be connected with each other, especially in the private practice setting where we are a little bit disjointed from the majority of our colleagues. We are maybe in touch here and there, but to be a part of these bigger things, it doesn't have to be every month if, we can't commit to that. But I really do encourage prioritizing that in a way that we see it as prioritizing our career, prioritizing our passion, prioritizing getting up to do what we do and coming into this field.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good message. You and I are on the same page. Honestly, it's so isolating, this profession, especially depending on the environment that you work in. And, for the first probably 7 years of my career, I did that solo private practitioner thing. And it was so draining and just having challenging cases sometimes and nobody to talk to, that there's so much community and support for us in grad school. And then we have supervision. But then after that, it's like just floating off in space by yourself. And what I wound up doing was starting a group practice, not even intentionally, it just kind of happened organically, just having, people come in and supervisees. And so it turned into a group private practice environment that's always really emphasized the connection, the relationships. So doing like consultation groups with a small group that meets regularly, continuing education, even like drop-in support, like, because, you have a crazy case and who are you going to talk to? And so to make some of that infrastructure available to clinicians. So I've been doing that internally in my group practice for many years, but I'm now opening that up to clinicians who are outside of the group practice. I'm calling it the growth collective, because because a lot of times, like, how are you going to design that being in private practice? Like, your choices are join a group practice. I mean, if you're lucky enough to join a good one where they're investing those types of resources, or potentially a well-organized agency or training site where some of that is built in. But again, I think for more advanced practitioners in private practice, that can be hard to find.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a big, disconnect in the, the idea of walking into a place where you want to fit in, connect, be with the like-minded individuals in the field, and, looking at, is this how I want to practice? Is this, if it's an agency, we also look at, most times when we walk into agency-based work, is it reimbursing what I would be worth or, want to be earning? And I think having an honest moment where private practice and agency-based work, most often there's a disconnect in the pay scale that people are looking at in the reimbursement. And that's where I think that financial incentives, and I think that, people talk about it quietly, but I do think it's important to bring it out into the open about what motivates us. And for a lot of people, moving into private practice is a financial motivator, but it also, it's a give and take. What do we give and what do we take? Yeah. What we give is our community. We give away our connection to others, because if we walk away from an agency and into the private world, and, for most people, they start either joining another group practice, and there are some practices that are really, it sounds like you've created a really amazing, wholesome place for clinicians to stay connected and grounded with each other in this work, which really, just as we talked about the message about needing to be connected, that's fundamental.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of places that, that's just not an option, where they just don't do that. And that could be the agency and it could be the clinicians, and it really just depends on the structure. I know that there's a lot of clinicians who maybe in theory want to be connected, but they want to do it on their own time. They're like, I want to be here. I want to show up how I want to show up, work how I want to work. And then I'll pick and choose the ways I show up in the community, the events or the things that are available to us. But, for myself, I remember specifically once I left an agency of, I think 400 people, it was this huge, huge community that I walked away from. I didn't really recognize how important those small moments of connection were until I was in my own office alone. And, it's not like walk out, grab some water, kind of the water cooler talk, even just like that passing, hey, hello, or, walking around, grabbing a coffee, just, just a little busy work that people are doing, lunchroom. Yeah. And it was different. And I think that, as the private setting grows, most people aren't going to get that same full connection, but to have some sort of interplay between that, where they get some exposure to someone else, especially that they can talk to about their day, about the work that we do, still having that and to be able to have that encapsulated in a professional environment where we can seek help from another clinician who's there, which is nice. And that's why when you mentioned consultation groups, I think that's so significant.
Well, that's a big piece of it. I mean, because, there's so much of this work that can be very ambiguous. It is hard to know exactly what the right thing is to do all the time. And I think that, we're not automatons, we're not robots. Our own stuff comes up. We can have reactions to clients, and sometimes it can be difficult to really operate fully independently and always be confident in your decisions. I mean, I know that I've had that experience many times as a clinician because so many things could potentially be true. There are so many different types of orientations, so many different ways of responding to the same thing. And I can't tell you personally how beneficial it's been for me, not just to be in a consultation group, but I think it's more about having the type of relationships with people who really, really know you and love you and have respect for you, but also care about you enough to be able to say, I wonder if we need to think about this a little bit differently, and kind of like lovingly challenge, because I think without those lifelines of relationships, therapists operating independently, where's the feedback? Where are the guardrails? Because a client isn't going to know what we should be doing or not doing. And of course, this can get incredibly dark when it comes into, unethical practices or boundary violations. And so, hopefully we're all staying out of that. But even just being able to think about the best way to help a client and getting perspective and feedback is so fundamentally important. So, I mean, that's the foundational aspect of what's been happening in my practice. And the Growth Collective is not just the continuing education and training and the knowledge, but the relationships that are based on trust. Because there has to be a lot of trust, I think, to be receptive to feedback from others, but also trust to, I can tell you what is coming up for me right now and know that you're not going to get defensive or blow up, or it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
So it's important.
Oh, fully. I agree.
Yeah.
I think that, as I, just to, chime in just on something that I think is so important, that feedback from other people, and we get used to ourselves being in routine, and it makes me think about the way that we work. If we were ever to isolate and don't have anyone else to talk to, our brains, they're not going to stay as sharp, and our vocabulary goes down. There are other things that, in the way that we orate will change. It will reduce. We will start to see what really feels like almost atrophying of our language abilities. And to kind of just use that as a parallel example, and I'm not saying that everybody in isolation or working independently is going to go through that, but to some degree, we're not, working out the same muscles when we are bouncing ourselves off. That idea of kind of back and forth, where we're presenting, defending, considering, challenging with each other, not to, there's a difference between that and, an attack on someone's clinical approach, but just that idea of just, that really is just the sharpening of the minds, I think is really important. And I do think that there is something to be said about that. And, something I really would encourage clinicians to be, a part of, to participate in, if not for the community, but just for yourself to keep, we are the tools in which we are using this work. And so to keep the tool sharp.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that part of that is by putting yourself in some situations where there's some diversity of thought and some challenge, that's can be a very positive thing. Yeah. That's great. Well, so much good stuff to talk about. But so before I let you go, first of all, just one more thing. So I understand that a big part of your work is around supervision and development of early career clinicians, if I'm understanding that right. And that oftentimes your supervisees or trainees are working in very complex and high stress environments in the agency settings or community mental health, things like child welfare, corrections, trauma-involved families. And so I guess I would be curious to hear just a little bit more about your perspective or recommendations for supervision in these contexts. So for our community listening to this right now, who is in this space, going back to these big ideas of the realities of some of the systems that we're operating in, our need for support and community, how do you help therapists stay effective, especially early career therapists, without getting burned out or depleted?
That is such a significant question about what do we do when it comes to burnout. I think that there are so many seminars or things that I've attended over time that have addressed this in some ways. And I try to reflect over my career, just over time, about what feels what really stood out to me, especially working with early clinicians, because there are a lot of times where I kind of think about it when you're younger and you want to drive really fast and you're in the fast lane and you're going, but it's not a sprint. We are designing this career to be a marathon. And I know that's kind of something you can say about a lot of things, but I really feel it's important here that a lot of people, they want to get up, they want to get going, and they want to put themselves in. And whether they want to prove it to themselves, to their supervisors, or however, maybe they just feel this need to be really entrenched in the clinical work. I think that a big part of it is learning how to put on our professional presentation of who we are as a clinician and identifying that person and learning how to separate ourselves from our clinical identity versus our personal identity. And that really is such a significant thing in protecting ourselves. I can show up to a room as this clinician because in this moment, this clinician is here. They are not worried about me on my personal level. And one of the things I really do help to try to check myself there at times is if I am starting to notice where I'm coming out of my professional identity, my counselor identity into a personal identity, is when I start to recognize I'm starting to react on a personal level to this situation where I am not, I'm starting to think with me as an individual versus me as a counselor. When I can allow myself to be there fully for the work, it also separates me and puts this barrier by saying, if I can focus specifically on what is happening in front of me, this client is sharing these things. This is data. This is information. My work is to be here to interpret this, provide counsel for this. This is almost looking at it as a problem to solve. And whether we're not solving our clients' problems for them, but the idea is how do we how do we counsel this? How do we guide this? That is a problem which we're solving. We're solving for trying to understand, what do I do with all this information, especially when it gets hard, especially when it gets overwhelming, whether it's a serious situation, challenging setting in which you're doing your practicum. You have a lot of clients coming in, learning how to say, okay, this is for the client, the clinical person showing up. This is my clinical person showing up. And once I'm recognizing that personal me is coming into the room, that's when I need to really tap my supervisor and say, hey, I am noticing that I am having a hard time separating my personal self from my clinical self. And that's where we start to bring in, are we experiencing any transference issues there? Mm-hmm. Are we notice something is going on between us, that client, the situation, the environment, and trying to use this opportunity to hopefully, and my assumption is we'll have some great supervisors in these settings, but also recognizing if your supervisor is not leading you in the way that you need to be instructed, how do we approach our supervisor and share with ourselves? And so I think that, and this really, I think more as an institutional thing, is about, helping students understand like the type of a supervision that may be effective with them. There are different types of ways people approach the supervision model. And, I do think that the type of supervisor matching that style with your clinician is going to be really important. And sometimes that's a luxury we don't always have. We have a supervisor in a setting and people are going to go in, and you gotta get in line with what they got going on. And, when it's hard, when we don't have the option to have all these ideal settings, I think that the one thing we still can try and true is learning how to keep ourselves separated as a clinician versus an individual. And that takes practice. That takes practice saying that I am going to walk in and I am going to be present. It's like a meditation exercise where we're saying, I can sit here, hear all of these things, if it is something that I'm hearing that is counter against my identity, my culture, my beliefs, my thoughts, my values, when we hear that, we can react to it. But the person reacting to that is your personal self versus the clinical self. The idea here is, what do we do with this? Are we noticing that this person's coming in with attitudes that are challenging for them, and that's where we're noticing conflict in their life? If I can work on how they are experiencing the situations that are evoking this, whether it's, understanding their past and being curious, getting more information. The idea is we take this data, what is coming at us, we turn it around and say, let's use this as information. Yeah. And that, I think, is the best place to start. Is when we can sit in the room and recognize that we're taking in information, we're doing the work. But when we start taking it in personally, then we have stepped out of our clinical selves and into our personal selves. Right. Setting that barrier up, to me, is so important to longevity.
Yeah. Because, when you are in that personal self place, that's when you can be harmed by the work and when it will begin to feel bad and depleting. But, as you were talking, I was just thinking about how interesting it is, I don't know if our profession is uniquely this way, but how so many therapists, and I've done this, identify with the profession on a personal level. You say, I am a therapist, and that becomes part of your self-identity and the way that you are in the world. And I think it's interesting in our profession, even socially, right? Like when you're not on duty and you sit somebody next to a plane, next to somebody on a plane, and they're like, "What do you do?" And you have that moment where, like, should I tell them I'm a therapist? Because like it means something. It does something, right? Yes. And just how interesting it would be if we stopped saying I am a therapist and started saying I work as a therapist. Like even just that language shift, like I provide this service for other people, but this is maybe not necessarily all that I am. 100%. As a way of creating that. Because I think I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. So I appreciate your perspective. Like we have to be, I hate to use the word compartmentalized because I think there are negative connotations around that. But in some ways, we're in a professional role.
Absolutely. And you know, that resonates with me. There've definitely been times where I've asked myself, oh, should I be something different today? Because I'm so tired and I don't want to talk.
Oh my gosh. I was having the best time with a new friend that I met on LinkedIn. We were having so much fun talking about all of the different things that therapists have done, like encountering new people or like at parties or social events where there's that moment where you're like, should I tell this person that I'm a therapist? And so we were coming up with alternative identities. I was going to be in multi-level marketing, like essential oils is what my cover story was going to be, and like watch the people back away slowly. Yeah.
Like, oh, okay.
What would your cover story be? If you're
my gosh.
I don't want to tell them I'm a therapist. Where would you go?
To me, I have definitely, I've caught myself in, I was like, I know that I've said it before, like I work in finance, and then they're like, oh, what part of finance? And then I'm like, oh no, what part of finance is available that I can say? What do I have access to? And I was like, just in banking. And like, I think I dwelled it down to I was like a bank teller, and you're like, oh, okay.
Then
and I think that,
alone.
I think that maybe they thought that I was just trying to, like zhuzh it up and make myself, I was like, that was a lesson well learned. My favorite,
hilarious.
My favorite one that I think that I do want to, try it a little bit more is, someone close to me is an amazing bartender. And there are times where I know that they are spoke to like a therapist, and I was like, you're a fun therapist because you get to drink with your clients. So there are times where I'm like, I'll just tell people I bartend. Although if someone were to ask me,
party therapist,
a
bartender.
but then if someone were to ask me some of the nuanced things, I would be like, kind of back to the financing again. I'm like, I'm just hilarious. A bar back. I don't know much about it.
I just wash the dishes. Oh,
yeah, I do the dishes. It really is. I think that just talking about what we do and who we are, a part of our identity, I think it's okay. And I know that there are a lot of people, and I've experienced myself where I'm proud of what I do. And I especially wanted to, feel that and be like, yeah, this is what I do. But I think that over time, it really can be a lot with what we put on ourselves. And I think that I think it clicked to me where it's like, I practice therapy. It's something that I practice, and it can be okay to not be who I am. It's something that I do. And I think that is something that will both take time, but I think also something important about that, again, kind of circling back to community, to having consult groups or people that you can talk to, where it's okay to not be a therapist, not to be on all the time, because I think that can also contribute to burnout.
Totally.
And people will relegate you into that position in your personal life all the time if they know that about you as your profession. Like, oh, go talk to this person, go do this, go do that. Yeah. And I think it comes from a place of love and care because they see you as someone capable and competent. But I think that there are times where I'm like, if I'm not working, I'm not on, so don't worry.
Totally. Yeah, or it goes the other way. Like if you're crashing out over something and like, people are like, aren't you a therapist? Like, this expectation that we're supposed to have it all together all the time. Yeah. Oh, come on. Yeah. Well, this has been so enjoyable just to get to know you and talk with you, get your perspective on different things. And so, but before I let you go, just maybe a tiny bit more about what the Hawaii Counseling Association is up to, and recommendations for how to get involved. If there are therapists who are listening about how do I get involved in advocacy, how do I get involved in my professional organization, more about what you're up to, where to find you.
Absolutely, thank you. So with again, and I'm a big proponent for joining your local chapter or big chapter organizations. The Hawaii Counseling Association, for us, again, we're a big part of supporting our larger bodies of work, going to legislation. We do provide trainings. We have some CEUs opportunities available. We provide free training for members. We provide, I think, really, fair cost training for people wanting to come in. So if you ever had an idea where you wanted to do something different, please come join us. We do provide some great quarterly, monthly trainings with some really knowledgeable people in the field. And I just think that having that access is wonderful. In the private setting, in the work that I do in my group practice, we have a wealth of wonderful people that work in Hawaii, Nevada, South Carolina. And so if you do find yourself in one of those states, you need some support, please reach out to us. We are kind of relaunching some of our social media in the next couple of months to try to be a little bit more providing of education, just kind of free tidbits. And, as we talk amongst, the therapists themselves and what we think is really important for us to put out there, just kind of some helpful tidbits for clients or clinicians. It's something that is a part of our just kind of education, giving back and what we want to do. So please follow us at the Hawaii Counseling Association. You can come to our page and check in with our training opportunities. We have a big one coming up at the end of the month, and we just do it consistently where we do sometimes joint ventures with other licensing bodies, and it's really a good time, and it's offered virtually. So it is really accessible.
Yeah. What's your upcoming training? Like what kinds of stuff are you guys teaching?
Well, I'm really happy that you asked. We have a big training at the end of the month for it's the Hawaii Behavioral Health. It is this really great eclectic thing where we're bringing in the social workers, the marriage and family therapists, the counselors, the psychologists. We're all coming together to talk about what's happening, what's on deck in regards to our coming up in the legislation. We also have training, just a variety of training, some wonderful speakers that are going to talk about trauma. They're going to talk about the work that we do, the systems, in addition to, I think there's 39 credits that you can get out of that. So there's just a wealth of knowledge. There's
a lot.
It's a 2-day event. You can join us online. It's a really wonderful thing. Or if you're in person, we have it here in Oahu, Honolulu, Hawaii. That might be a little bit far of a journey for some people, but this is something.
I know, but it's an excuse to go to Hawaii.
Not a bad excuse to come down.
You can write that off.
Write that off. Come on in. Come join us for the training. I think that it's, and I will say too, and this is something that I think is really wonderful. If you ever get the opportunity to plug into a training in a different location, I think it's fun because you get access to a different environment and you get to hear some different perspective. I think it's fun. So I have a bias, and I do say come join us at the Hawaii Counselor Association. But if you want to do that somewhere else, I think that's great too. But that's a bit of what we're up to, what we're doing. And so if anyone sees this and gets inspired to give it a shot, I'd be really grateful to have you join us.
Amazing. So cool. Well, Gino Titus Luciano, it was such a pleasure to meet you. And thank you so much for all the work you're doing with the Hawaii Counselors Association, but also your work with supervisees and just your support of therapists in general. I can tell just talking with you what a genuine passion you have to certainly support people in your community, but that you're trying to do that by supporting the helpers, helping the helpers, and making sure that the counselors within your sphere are resourced and have opportunities and have what they need to be healthy and well in this profession. And thank you very much for everything that you're doing.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for giving me a platform and letting me join you on this to just share about myself and to learn about you, what you folks do too. And, it's just really an awesome thing to be able to just continue to connect and build bridges. And I think that is just, building bridges of resource for those in the community. So thank you for doing that and, giving people that opportunity to have a place to come in and chime in and hear that and learn more. So I appreciate what you do for the community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a labor of love. What a great conversation, wasn't that? I thought Gino was wonderful. And I think he was also being quite modest in our conversation. So in addition to being the president of the Hawaii Counseling Association, he is also running the KUA Mental Health and Wellness Group, and doing clinical supervision, a variety of different training opportunities. And I will have links to all of those things in the show notes for this podcast at growingself.com. And then before we wrap up, I did want to mention something else. So as I was speaking with Gino, you heard me talking a little bit about something called the Growth Collective. And this is a newer initiative of mine. Well, it's not new. I mean, I've been doing this, you guys, for like 10 years within Growing Self, creating community for therapists, a learning environment, a supportive environment, access to clinical supervision, access to consultation groups, even private practice success coaching is part of what we've done in our practice to meet the needs of therapists who are making the transition into private practice from an agency setting or a clinic setting, and who really struggle with the differences of how to show up in a private practice environment in order to connect with clients, build a practice. So that's been a big part of what I've been doing for a long time. But as I mentioned in my conversation with Gino, I am now doing that for therapists at large. While in the past, this has only been something for people in my group practice, I'm opening it up. So if you are a licensed therapist, I do have to limit this to licensed therapists for the moment. So licensed therapists who want consultation partners, a dedicated consultation group, mentorship, coaching around how do we stand up a successful private practice? How do I handle some of these situations when I am a solo entrepreneur ethically and effectively? But also continuing education that I hope to be meaningful and relevant for you personally and professionally. There's a lot of opportunities for us to do clinical continuing education to help us master our craft. And that is fantastic. But I also think that we need to be talking about and prioritizing the type of professional development that helps us be okay, develop ourselves, expand our skill set, develop more sustainable careers. And so that is what we will be doing in continuing education in the Growth Collective. And then additionally, we are doing a lot of just community and social support. And so I'm setting this up as a just membership opportunity for anybody who would like to join, who is a licensed therapist in good standing. We'll seek to match you with a consultation group of peers that is similar to you, a similar background, perspective, orientation, so that you can have people who really get what you're talking about. And in our consultation groups, they will all be facilitated live by a very experienced clinical supervisor. So this isn't just like an online, peer support group. This is in real life meetings, well, virtual, I will say that iteration of in real life, because we have people from all over the place, but virtual meetings facilitated by a supervisor to talk about yourself, challenges, cases, tough moments, to celebrate wins, to get loving feedback from people who know you and care about you, all kinds of good stuff. So if you would like to learn more about the Growth Collective, maybe even get involved, come to growingself.com/therapists, and you'll see more about it there. All right, you guys, that's it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you soon on another episode of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists.